Should we start on time, or do you want to give it a second? What do you think? What do you want? Do you want to start now?
Sure.
All right. We'll start now. I wrote an introduction. You want to hear it? Yeah. And hear the introduction. I'm Adam. Do you remember I used to teach here? I don't. That's why I wrote this down. And I'm sleep deprived because of these people here. So we'll get into that. You'll understand more later. Hi. I wrote that down. Before we begin, let me first explain the format of today's talk. It's got a format. You may have thought you were going to see 4 artists. You're not. You're going to see 5 artists. A recent graduate of Longwood's Design and Craft program with a concentration in ceramics, the best concentration clearly, Mary Maglieri has agreed to join us. Mary. So 5 artists will speak 10 to 15 minutes. That's how long it'll be. Come on in. Don't let me intimidate. Come on in. What? Yeah. Come on. Yeah. Yeah. Make yourself at home. You don't have to sit in the back. There's space up here. Come on. So each artist will speak 10 to 15 minutes. Yes. Welcome. Welcome. Parking's hard, isn't it? I know. In this place, you're going to get a ticket. I'm sorry. Then we will have a round table discussion where they will field questions. This might be a really fun part. So if you have a question, save it up. All right, don't interrupt. And we'll discuss whatever comes up. That'll be nice. And it would be interesting and respectful to give a proper introduction to all of our artists today, because I sincerely hold each and every one of them in the highest regard. I owe a great depth of gratitude. I've learned a great deal from each of them and feel a genuine love and respect for them all. Most of the time. It would be interesting but cruel to you, because to properly introduce each artist and then have them speak would put us into the wee hours of the morning. And it was in the wee hours of the morning while I was throwing wood into the mouth of a very large, very hot kiln that you should all come and see. So hot it looks like the face of the sun, when the Earth's orbit slid into place and cast a shadow over the moon. A blood moon. If any of you were up this morning, it was amazing. In a similar fashion, and with a little blood, sweat, and tears, our guests today seem to be in orbit with many large and hot kilns whose center of gravity form community. In fact, it takes community to even fire them. This is a week-long firing that we're doing here at the Old Ridge Onagama Kiln. It was built by Randy and Cricket Edmondson, whose gravity pulled into its orbit the 6 of us, our gracious hosts, Randy and Cricket, many current and former Longwood students, the Longwood Clay Club, Cub Creek Foundation, and a whole cast of characters. It forms the context of today's talk. But it is not the kiln itself or the firing that is the most interesting thing. It is what happens around the kiln. It is the work. It is the work that the kilns have the power and the potential to create. Work that is physically imbued, not with esoteric or the academic, but with sweat, time, knowledge, and wisdom. The paths that lead to this sort of work, to these sorts of kilns, they're interesting. At times, they are the most interesting thing. Interesting particularly for many of you who are beginning your own paths, maybe to kilns, maybe to working out in the world. Whatever the work is, however that works to get made, maybe it can be imbued with at least, the very least, a little bit of knowledge and wisdom. So today here we have, to talk about their journey and their work, we'll go alphabetical by last name. We've got Chris Archer by way of New Hampshire. We have Bruce Dehnert by way of New York. Tyler Gulden by way of Maine. Mary Maglieri by way of Virginia. And Dan Molyneux by way of California. So warm welcome. So, Chris Archer is our first speaker.
Good afternoon. Wonderful to see you. I just want to give a quick thank you to Adam personally for inviting us down here. There's a lot of thanks to be given to the Edmondsons, to some of you in the audience who are going to be with us for the entire week or here and there firing the kiln, and to my friends who've also made the journey here. It's just really special to be here. And one of the things that Adam had sort of spoken to us about was, one of the more interesting things to talk about today, and we're just going to try to keep this brief so that you can come up with some questions or discussion points where we can all talk about it later, is how do we get here? And here it could be to Farmville, Virginia. It could be to the kiln at the Edmondsons. This is what we're doing. But for my part of this, I want to start here as sort of an example of one of the constants that's been in my path to become the artist and the teacher that I am today. And I don't mean fire. But when we're firing these kinds of kilns, in my opinion, and the way that I look at it, it's a controlled improvisation. There's a foundational structure that we can follow, but it is not something that is set in stone, and it is not an itemized to-do list. There's a lot of observation, there's a lot of trial and error, there's a tremendous amount of failure involved in that. And the way that I look at wood firing is it's been my muse for not just my work, but in the way that I live my artistic life and probably my life in general. So I'm going to flip through some things, and I think we're all going to talk a little bit about where we came from and how we got there. Hopefully you'll see in the images today that there is, at least with what I do and what I've done, there's quite a bit of diversity. I'll start by saying I really like the idea, it's going to sound bad, I want to make what I want to make when I want to make it, right? And as self-righteous or sort of egocentric as that sounds, I'm trying to make a deal with the cosmos. If I can make what I want to make when I want to make it and follow curiosities, if I can one day get stuff from my woods up in New Hampshire where we have granite and we have different feldspars and throw it in my clay and see what happens, I promise I will try to only put work out into the world that I'm proud of and that I think is worthy. But that means I'm going to do a whole lot of stuff that stinks, right? And that's just the way that I kind of go about things. And in that way, what you're seeing in the first part here are images of work that's been in firings like what we're doing over at the Edmondsons, where, for 8 days at a time sometimes, we're sort of working in concert with the kind of wood that we have, the size of wood that we have, the fact that it's going to rain like crazy here on Friday. None of that's a problem. It's simply things that, are my process is an accretion of all the stuff around me. And that's sort of the way that my career path has started. I'll say this, I never touched clay until I was 20 years old. I went to college wanting to go to art school, but my family situation was such that was not going to be a possibility. And because of that, I went and did what you're supposed to do when you have the nerdy grades that I did, and I was pre-med for 2 years, or a year and a half. And to be honest, I wasn't unhappy, but it certainly wasn't right for me. And I went one semester without drawing, without making art, and I really needed to make a change. And thank goodness for teachers. I just want to put that out there. Hopefully you have really great ones. And I know at least with Adam and some of the colleagues he's introduced, I know you do. I had a wonderful teacher named Charles Rice, who is unfortunately passed away. And we were talking one day and he said, if you want to be a high school art teacher and you're in the wrong place, you need to pull up your big boy pants and go home and have that conversation. And so I did, and it was freeing. And what I really wanted to do was I wanted to make art, and I wanted to be a printmaker, and I had images in my head. I'm flooded, I have synesthesia slightly, so I'm flooded with sounds and noises and smells, and they're all in a weird place inside. And so I went to art school, but I also didn't visit it. I picked it because it was close to my first school, and I could see my friends. The colors were purple and gold, and I had gotten rejected from a school that was purple and gold. I mean, seriously, this is how I was making decisions, right? And I knew that they had just gotten $1 million grant for these wonderful Takish presses, these lithograph presses. And so I knew that their printmaking program was really good, and it was something that was of interest to me. So I went there, and they said, welcome to Alfred University. You have to take a 3D class. And I said, thank you. No, I'm not here for that. And they said, no, you have to. How many of you in the room have taken a class that you have to take? Right. Don't knock it. You never know where it's going to go. Right? And then I was hemming and hawing, and this gentleman in the orange shirt right there, one of my dear friends, who I had already made friends with once I got there, because he took pity on me, said, hey, you should do this. It's got fire. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And I, again, had wonderful teachers, and it set up a thing. But I got to tell you this, by the time I was ready to leave, and I didn't stay too long, they were kind of like, oh, buddy, good luck out there. That tells you all you need to know about my skill set. My skill set was nowhere near sort of the measurement of who I was as an artist or what my potential could be. So when I left college, I worked production, or I tried to. I went back home and worked in a record store, which, by the way, was awesome. I got tickets to every concert. I got tons of CDs, like the record companies, all that. But it was for me, it wasn't enough, and I couldn't see a future there. I was also living at home. How many of you live at home or are going to? Right. Don't know about you. Well, of course you did. But I needed to get out of there. So I went in Ceramics Monthly, and I looked in the classifieds, and I saw that they were looking for a production potter up in New Hampshire. Didn't really care to go to New Hampshire. Again, it was just sort of on a whim, taking a chance. And so I went up there, and they said, no, you're not good enough. And then 3 months later, they called me up again, and they said, you know glaze chemistry, right? And I said, begrudgingly, yes. And they said, you can pull hand. I had to try out there before. And they had just gotten an order, and this is the company. They had just gotten an order, not the greatest, not my style, but they had just gotten an order for 3,000 mugs from the company Timberland, and they needed a green that matched the green of Timberland, and they needed somebody to pull 3,000 handles and sort of work the management of everything. And so 3 months after that initial meeting, I just went up there on a whim, lived in a guy's spare bedroom that had no door, and the bathroom was in his bedroom. So in the middle of the night, if I had to go, I went to the McDonald's down the street. But it was something I just had to give a try for a while, and sometimes I slept in the studio. And it was a lot of hard work, and I learned a lot of things there. Most of it was not just the skills of working on the wheel or doing craft shows. There were a few years where I was on the road from late August all the way through Thanksgiving, selling pots that were not mine and trying to be very happy and wonderfully excited about that. But it taught me kind of, through that experience, I didn't just gain these skills, but I started to feel what was right inside. I started to feel like there was a voice. And so I was making pots. These are not the pots from those days. Those pots were still not good enough to show in an environment like this. But, having that young energy, I was able to stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning and occasionally put things in the kiln and work myself through not only the skills of making, but really trying to find myself in the vastness of the landscape of ceramics and the history of ceramics, and also the contemporary environment of what's going on. And this, just give you some dates, this is about 1993. Excuse me. So I started making pots and traditional pots, and I still do, but I'll be honest, I don't feel 100% like a potter. I don't know how many people have done this in the room, but I felt like trying different things. And this piece is very special to me because I got into Ceramics Monthly with this piece. In the story, in the narrative here, I left that production place and had some very good friends who lent me a couple $1,000s, and I made a go of it myself. In over 7 years, I built up a studio where I taught classes, And I did all kinds of, production things for my own, wholesaling here and there, just making a living. I was telling Mary that I used to make ceramic fortune cookies, stick them in a backpack, go down to Tower Records in Boston and just sell them on the street. Now, unfortunately, as a young idiot, I spent all that money before I got on the bus and went home. But you learn from these things. Luckily, as I was faced by an investor who said, hey, those fortune cookies, we could make some money. And he had money to throw around and like go into business. This piece, not a great piece. It's all right, but it got into strictly functional. It got into this juried exhibition. So I spent $30 to get juried. Luckily, thank goodness I did. I spent money to send it. Nobody bought it. I spent money to get it home. And I was like, I like this. I like the fact that there was a validation of some sort, because I have an ego. I think we all do. I like that validation of, okay, you're doing something that you're not, that's coming instinctively. You're improvising, right? You're riffing with a material, and it resonates outside of yourself. And that's a very, very, for me, very intoxicating thing. So that over the time, that set things in motion where I started playing with forms, taking things, I think we call it altering, taking the conventional round symmetry and goofing around with it, in this case, reorienting it. Took a long time, but I eventually, for me, decided that graduate school was correct. And I didn't make that decision until I was about 35 years old or 36 years old. Whoops. And that sort of broke everything wide open. That was one of those moments, and maybe you are thinking about grad school. It was one of those moments where it turned everything upside down, and rather than being defined as a ceramicist, a potter, a sculptor, or whatever, I was being pushed to answer the question, who are you, right? And that was a really deeper question, and at 36, I was finally maybe getting mature enough to handle that. I certainly wasn't that mature when I was 26 or anywhere between. And it's given me the confidence to take on different projects, and also to not only go back to pottery, but to think about ways that I think pottery can be situated into life. It really sort of, for me, took that idea of art being over here, and Chris wears the art hat, Chris wears the teacher hat, and the husband hat, and the father hat, and all that, and it sort of just said, we carry who we are through everything in life, and they're all interrelated. And and it's hard to explain that as you see this, but that's what the subject matter is here. That's what the subject matter is in things. Whether I make a simple pot, glazed or unglazed, sculpture or sculptural arrangements, installations, and even performance. And this is why I think that for me, the beauty and the inspiration of that controlled improvisation of fire has sort of brought me to Farmville, and I'm very happy to meet you all.
The arrows, is that correct?
Yep.
Perfect. Great.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and taking time out of your day, a beautiful day out there. I hope you've all voted. And thank you, Adam, for bringing us all together, these guys and yourself, and then also for bringing us together with Randy and Cricket, who aren't here right now. They are literally at the kiln that you saw in Chris's slides, and taking care of the kiln and firing it while we're here. So I'm really glad it's getting filmed so Randy and Cricket can see that later. My name is Bruce Dehnert, and I was born in Montana but raised in Wyoming. My hometown is smack dab in the center of that photograph, and it's up against the Wind River Reservation, which is home to the Shoshone and Arapaho people. The gentleman in the middle, this is his inauguration for being the youngest chief of the Shoshone ever in the oral history of the people. And this is his powwow, and he and I grew up together. This is a photograph of me for Adam, because Adam and I are always talking about riding horses. Now on this you'll notice a small detail where my ass is a little high, and it doesn't end well. So I'd like to talk about mentorship a little bit, because having mentors has been crucial to my career, as it is, I'm sure, to all of you in this room. And I do count my parents as mentors, because my mother was a journalist, small town newspaper in Wyoming, and my father an architect, but they were also potters. They made pots, and my dad designed and built kilns around the Intermountain West. This is visiting my mom's Mecca. So this is the New York Times when we were all there, and it was the most exciting day of her life, except for my birth. And so this is meant a lot to her to visit the what she feels is the country's greatest newspaper. This is a couple of photographs of my father's architecture, and this is in Laramie, Wyoming. He specialized in solar and in earth shelter. And this is the arena at the University of Wyoming, in which basketball and volleyball and rock concerts and so forth take place. He's very organic in his architecture, but has to abide in his career by lots of rules, and the rules of physics, the rules of engineering, the rules of regulations, and so forth. So as an artist, I really look to his architecture from an aesthetic standpoint, but more importantly, probably, I look at it as a dialogue between him and myself. And I started off school. This is another shot of a high school in Wyoming, which is the first solar-powered high school in the United States. But that wall in the very center is really important in terms of understanding my work, both as a potter, but especially as a sculptor throughout my career. I started off in school to be a playwright, so I went to Boston University. I wanted to be a writer like my mom. And so I went to Boston University and then transferred to University of Montana, which had a super well-known writing program under the guide of this gentleman, William Kittredge. And some of you may have read A River. Thank you. So he was the main editor on that book. And he was an amazing gentleman because he loved film as well. He loved screenwriting. He loved making films. He also loved poetry and writing fiction. So he's really an interesting professor to have, and he's really an interesting guy and very supportive. So this is a book that I wrote on Simon Leach. He was the grandson of one of our field's more well-known practitioners by the name of Bernard Leach from England. And so I had this opportunity handed to me, which seemed totally overwhelming. And one of the points that I want to make about with my talk is never say no. Because when the publisher approached us to do this project, I had exhibitions I had committed to and so forth. But writing a book, having been a writer, seemed to be like a really important thing to do. And it turned out to be an insane process, but because of deadlines. And but I'm very, very glad that Simon and I did this book. Another mentor is Rudy Audio. So at the University of Montana, when you're in the writing program, you have to take a creative class every semester. And you can take the same thing over and over again. So I took independent study in ceramics because I had grown up making pots alongside my parents. And so Rudy was one of my teachers there, and Ken Little also. And then I assisted Rudy in his studio later. And Rudy, as a mentor, gave me a really great piece of advice because when I got out of school, I decided I didn't want to be a writer. I wanted to make pots. And so I called him up and I asked him, so what would you do? And he said, well, why don't you look for a production job? Chris talked about it a few minutes ago, and get the skills, and then open up your own studio. So I approached it like this. So there was really good money being made out in the uranium fields of Wyoming. And I had some carpentry skill, because when I was going to school, I worked for carpenters. And so I got a job with this construction company that built this mine and built a number of others and so forth. And it was absolutely fascinating work because of the nature of the ore that's being taken out of the earth and the way that it has to be handled and so forth. And when I look at this photograph years later, I'm like, oh my God, that seems so lax in regulation, because this stuff is going to bombs and it's going to power plants and that kind of thing. But it was really an important experience, because it's hard work, and especially out in the middle of Wyoming, where the wind never stops and the winters are really brutal. Another one of my mentors was Susan Peterson. So I worked for Susan as an assistant, like Mary has been doing, and she was my department head. And then I later moved to New York. There was an opportunity for me to teach for a semester at Hunter College, and I ended up not leaving for about 6 years. And Susan was always a super important mentor, and her best piece of advice to me was, I really fell in love with sculpture. Up until that point, I had a production pottery and so forth, and I went to New York and I saw all this great sculpture on the streets. And so I thought, I would really like to learn more about sculpture. She says, well, go to graduate school. And so I went to Alfred University, where I met Tyler and Chris. They were undergraduates. So we go back 33 years together. And this is a couple of pieces from my graduate exhibition. Another mentor, most important person in my life is my wife, Govinda, and she is a painter. She's originally from England. She's Sikh heritage, and this is a piece. So in my practice, I do pots, I do sculpture, I write, I do films, and so forth. And so during the pandemic, I did a small movement piece and put it together, and Govinda performed it. And she performed it out in a field of shotgun shells. So those are all shotgun shells and clay, what do you call them?
Pigeons?
Yeah, clay pigeons. These are examples of her work. So painting on the left and a charcoal drawing on the right. So she's very inspiring, and she really introduced the use of more vivid color into my ceramics through her inspiration. And then also through the forms that she uses. Also, we have dealt with clouds. We've played around with clouds in our work back and forth for almost 30 years now. So this is Lander, where I grew up, is in the middle of silver and gold mining country, and so what you're going to see are some bodies of work now that I make and the ideas that I'm responding to. So I oftentimes respond in my work to my familial background, or the geography, geology, architecture obviously is very important because of my father. And so I call these ingots. They're wood-fired. These are examples of butter dishes, also wood-fired. I wanted to do a butter dish. Butter dish is kind of an iconographic piece for potters, and I hadn't done butter dishes before. And so I looked around in my mind what form I'd like to make a butter dish out of. And after I started thinking about them, and the reason I thought about them is because the Sikhs, their butter is clarified, it's called ghee, it's liquid. And, and it can sit out for a long time. Our butter, European form of butter, of course, as you know, tends to need to be kept cool, comes in bars, cubes, that kind of thing. So they're very different materials. So I wanted to make a butter dish that responded to our European, my family European type of butter. And so one day at the grocery store, I looked down and I saw the crown on the imperial margarine. So I'll take my ideas from different places. I'll take my ideas often through silhouette, where like if I hold up my hand and you have the shadow here, I kind of analyze the form according to that silhouette and then try to move it out into a three-dimensional shape. I wanted to reference my Norwegian background and Covinda's Sikh background. So this is a cabin in Montana near where my mom grew up, and the technique is called rose mailing, and they paint everything in the house. These are the brides of a Sikh. These are the feet of a Sikh bride. And so her tradition comes from the henna type of tradition. So I tried to marry those two traditions of motif together into the butter dishes. I don't sign my work. I usually hide my initials in the work, so you can see that on the top of this one. So B's and D's. And by doing that, it helps develop some kind of motif, some kind of design. I like to reference nature. My work is, because I'm a writer, my work is a diary of where I've been. So wherever I go, my work can change dramatically. I'm not one of those who kind of holds on to a certain way of working towards masterwork, but rather I like to play around with lots of different ideas in a kind of schizophrenic sort of way. So I'm always looking at the environment in which I'm making work. These are, I call them GT 2400, so gin and tonic, and the temperature they're fired to. They're kind of based on those acorns. They have some of the floral thing. Also the feet, I carve the feet of my pots with oftentimes with the shape, a general part of the shape of a kiln that it's going to be fired in. So these were fired in a Naborigama kiln with 2 chambers. I reference my father's architecture, and in this case I'm referencing a little building in Atlantic City, Wyoming, which is a little ghost town that had a mine there. So it's kind of that classic Western storefront piece, and it's also referencing the red rocks around where I grew up. It's a beautiful landscape there, and we have a lot of iron-rich rock. These are examples of mugs, cups with handles. I like glaze that moves. When I think about putting glaze on my pots, I'm thinking about the heat, I'm thinking about the temperature, and I'm thinking about talking to the person who's using the work and explaining through the work some aspect of the fact that the thing was very hot. These are little shot cups for tequila. I like to hide things in my pots and in the imagery and so forth, and I started doing that as a writer. So I started off in playwriting, but ended up in poetry. And one of the aspects of my poetry was taking and hiding different kinds of meanings within the sentences, trying to embed sentences and paragraphs with things that might not at all relate to what's going on. And so I do that with a pot. So a person might see the bottom of this bowl and think those are flowers, but those are actually bombs. And so I like that idea of darkness and light. I like that idea that, not everything in life is perfect. There are contrasts and contradictions. People who are contradictory will drive us all crazy, but I absolutely love that aspect of them, especially from the perspective of writing. They provide real interesting material. So these are hammerhead sharks down at the bottom of that one. I wanted to do a salad dressing, so I'm thinking about, when you put salad dressing onto your salad and you're pouring it on there, it's almost like a watering can out in the garden, so you're making that kind of connection. So I'm looking around for a kind of shape to do. The top image is Frank Gehry's museum in Bilbao, Spain, and the bottom is a tugboat in New Bedford, Massachusetts, where I was when I started making this body of work. So I'm looking at these two distinctly different forms of mariner architecture and thinking about using those in creating ewers, and thinking about the way that the weight on the building and the weight on that little tugboat are very, very specifically displaced, creating kind of an asymmetry. So I wanted to introduce this idea of asymmetry to the watering cans or the salad dressing. I like music. I love music. I'm a musician, so I like to work in some musical motifs occasionally. There's a little series of plates. For one exhibition, I decided to make religious two bodies of work of religious icons that we're very familiar with, angels and devils. And so these are, when I first start off working on a body of work, I might do some drawings, or in this case, drolages. I call them drolages, so it's a drawing on top of a collage. And this is the cat sitting in the sunshine that I was talking about this morning. So my studio cat is sitting in the door, specific shape, and I just took that shape of her outline, contour drawing, and moved it into this little devil. She's a mean little cat. This is one of the angels, and so on this one, it was put in a lake, and it's up on a steel mount I built a crank, steel crank, so it's like a tripod. So I could raise and lower it according to the height of the lake, because the lake is a man-made lake. And so it was going to stay there for a year, so I wanted the angel to come up and down. And the piece is Gethsemane's reflection. This I included for Chris Archer, this gentleman over here. This I did for an exhibition. I decided to take on some characters that I kind of invented in thinking about William Shakespeare's characters. So they aren't about specific characters from Shakespeare, but they're meant to kind of allude to that. One of the great things about being an artist has been, for me, I've had the opportunity to travel the world, and so I taught in New Zealand for a number of years, and I did this piece as an ode to one of my brothers, and it's based off of an altar. He's a Christian fundamentalist, and so I wanted something that would kind of honor his background, and he's a trumpet player, so the trumpet is the central character there, and the piece is 10 feet high by 18 feet long, so it's large, all life scale. Like I said, sometimes I start with drawings and I hide things. So in that drawing, that's a 4-foot square drawing, and sometimes things are hidden. So there are some B-52 bombers and so forth hidden within that drawing. And it was just a way of kind of starting to study this installation that I made based on love, based on my 3 favorite architects, my father, Frank Gehry, and I.M. Pei. And so what's holding each of those flowers, it was kind of a recyclable process where I'd carve the architectural mounts for the flowers, keep the soft clay in a bag, and later create the stems and the flowers with them. And a museum in New Zealand purchased the piece. And this is just part of it. There were 1,700 flowers. We lived in Borneo. My wife and I taught at an Islamic university there for a couple of years. This is our city, Kuching. There were these massive forest fires while we were living there, and the president of the university asked us if we would do an exhibition together on university grounds, because Malaysia is a dictatorship. And he asked us if we would mind doing an exhibition in which we wouldn't make our point of view obvious. And we thought that was the most magnificent ask ever. And how do you do that? How do you make art as a Western artist and not have it be some kind of critique? And so I came up with my idea was to address the idea of the clouds, of the climate, and so forth. So the upper pieces are dirty clouds, or representations of dirty clouds. Lower parts are toilet parts, or the parts of cars that don't work, shocks, struts, parts of toilet plumbing that isn't working, and so forth. And I just cast all these different parts out of local clay. So this is Borneo clay. And this is called Canopy. So Borneo is a jungle, and I want to reference that. This is I call it hippo. So I was thinking about the top part of a hippo when they're submerged underwater, wanting to respond to it. This is a calyx, this is Greek calyx, and sometimes I'll take well-known pots and just do a response to them. So this is my response to a calyx, which then led into my more recent work. This is a wood-fired piece, and this is also a wood-fired piece looking down on top of it. And the last few pieces, I wanted to be a puppeteer, so my first puppet was Pinocchio. I love Pinocchio. I still have him. And for an exhibition, I thought, oh, what if I take the string from Pinocchio and I create the entire exhibition with just the one string? So I took the string off my puppet, and for the next month, I just created works using just the string and the clay. And there's Pinocchio, and thank you very much.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, super. All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tyler Gulden. I too also want to share some acknowledgments and thank Adam and the folks here at Longwood for hosting us for this talk, and thank you all for coming out to spend some time with us to hear about our kind of adventures in clay. As Bruce was indicating, our wonderful kiln hosts, Randy and Cricket, are sadly kind of, well, not sadly, I mean, I guess it's important. They're there for an important reason, but it's sad that they're not here to be with us for this.
They're being savage.
But again, they're performing an ultimate duty. A couple of quick, just kind of introduction notes. So I grew up in Massachusetts, and have seemingly found myself with kind of an embarrassment of riches when it comes to kind of experiences and intersections with members of the ceramics community, kind of like throughout the country, that have really kind of helped shape a lot of the kind of paths that I've made, or the paths that I've taken. And during dinner last night, Chris and Dan and I were talking, and Dan, was saying that, like, everybody kind of has to, like, you got to spend your hours, like, earn your stripes, like you got to take your 10,000 hours. And it struck me, I was like, but those 10,000 hours don't have to be the same 10,000 hours. And it's kind of really great to hear all these other perspectives, because you'll hear my story is different from Bruce's, is different from Chris's, and is different from Mary's and Dan's. So, this is a really kind of great experience even for me, because for some of these folks, I haven't even heard them speak publicly about their lives and their paths in this way. So this is really great. So I am a self-professed pothead, but the pottery part of my kind of foundation began through kind of a chance internship, mentorship with a fellow named Leon Nygrosh in Worcester, Massachusetts, between high school and college. And in that time with him, I would go to his studio and I would encounter kind of his process and how he worked. But we would also just go and do laundry or go to the library, or I would help him with his teaching. And I discovered that being an artist, and for him being a potter specifically, wasn't just a job, it was a lifestyle. And that had great appeal to me, because this program I was in offered other avenues for internship and things like that, where I could work at a newspaper, and I worked on a presidential campaign. And it was all very compartmentalized, and it really didn't have a lot of kind of relationship or kind of reward within the bigger scope of my life. So that time that I spent with this gentleman, Leon, kind of informed me that I'm looking for something that's more of kind of a lifestyle decision rather than just a job, and then the rest of my life is somehow separate from that. And not that that's a bad thing, but that's just what I was looking for, and what really kind of inspired me to pursue the path in the arts. And that led me to Alfred University, where I intersected with Bruce and with Chris. And I had really wonderful mentors and faculty members, and not just faculty members. It was probably just as important with my colleagues and my peers in the school to learn and kind of talk, listen, and learn to kind of understand how other people are taking the perspective into their work. But that value of the mentorship of folks like Val Cushing and Wayne Higby, John Gill, Andrea Gill, really remarkable faculty, pushed me in a lot of directions because they all had their own opinions, their own ideas, their own philosophies about the way that they see the world. And as a student there, it forced me to really kind of figure out how to forge my own path with all of these kind of diverse and often conflicting perspectives kind of colliding in my studio and in my head as they would come in. And when I left, I felt like I had a really strong foundation to be able to kind of generate ideas and pursue things without necessarily like being kind of like given an assignment and say, here, like this is what you need to do. Or if the assignment was to do like this, like you were kind of expected to put your own spin on it and just kind of do some rote thing. So there was a kind of a great matter of independence, I guess, that was kind of both given and expected through that program. And that led me to a residency program at Peters Valley Craft Center, which I guess Bruce and I never intersected there, but he has a history in that location as well. And that was my first opportunity to kind of really be independent and have to pursue ideas on my own, just forge the resources as I needed them to create the work that I wanted. And that was everything from like going out and picking up wood to fire a wood kiln, mixing my own clay, having a job to help sustain myself in that particular environment. But the intersections that I had with all of the other kind of like students and residents that came through this particular program were really great because it just, again, continued to foster that idea of having to kind of take information in, sort through it, distill it, and turn it into something that really kind of had my stamp of authorship on it. I got to back up a little bit because I kind of I forgot to be moving. So pottery and specifically, wheel thrown work was really kind of like the emphasis of when I was in school. But I did explore some ideas in terms of sculpture. And I was really kind of interested in this idea of kind of like taking over space, thinking about artists like Michael Heiser and Robert Smithson and folks that really kind of commanded a particular presence in a space. So thinking through that, I created some installations in the school that will kind of recycle, and I'll talk a little bit more about it as I get talking about graduate school. That departure from Peters Valley, I really kind of stuck with the functional aspects of my work during that residency. But I, from there, wound up at UMass Dartmouth in Massachusetts as both kind of a technician and then a graduate student, and had a lot of opportunity to work with some very inspiring mentors in that environment also. And that really kind of directed me or kind of returned my attention to work that was much more geared toward this kind of engagement aspect, where the sculptures were intended to kind of create an opportunity or kind of entice somebody in that environment to engage with it in some way. So just for reference, this table is coated with paprika. So like all the decisions that went into every object and every sculpture was intended to kind of suck you in and bring you into the work in a way that was kind of like irresistible. And so the result is that people would go in and they would start touching it, because basically once you touch that dusted stuff, you can't untouch it. There's no erasing it. It just gets worse every time you try and fix it. So it then kind of became this like kind of sounding board and a messaging board. Above this table was a camera that projected a kind of a scene out to a television in like the student lobby area where students would gather. And it became this kind of like thing where people would leave notes for each other. You know, someone would go in there and write like lunch at 12 or whatever. It took until like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years after graduate school that I realized that there was an actual connection between the functional aspects of the work that I was pursuing and the sculpture, in the sense that the way I perceive my functional work is it's not complete until it's been kind of utilized. You know, if somebody takes a piece of work home and just puts it on the shelf, it's kind of like in this state of limbo where it hasn't really completed a circuit. Like I want it to be used, and the decisions I make in the creation of the objects is for people to pick them up, engage with them, put them to use, not just kind of set them for display and forget about them. Another touchstone that kind of came into my orbit as I was in graduate school was an opportunity to do a residency at an institution called the Watershed Center for Ceramic Arts in Newcastle, Maine. And I was in graduate school at the time and worked with a really interesting collection of artists from the UK, Spain, Portugal, and I think she was German. But it was a really interesting kind of international gathering of artists that all had very unique, interesting perspectives. Some of them had never worked in clay. So Watershed is specifically a ceramic arts center, but it does entertain getting artists in to just experiment and try ideas out. Just from my experience as a resident artist at Peters Valley and some other kind of intersecting things that don't have time to talk about all of those things, that the value of that opportunity to be in a residency program and kind of share and exchange ideas with other artists, I can't overstate the value of what those kinds of opportunities represent. So if that's been kind of like a curiosity of yours of like, what's that like? Where, like, is there an opportunity that exists for me? Find it, they're out there, and take advantage of it if and when you can. Because the rewards, you may not even realize, like in a 2-week residency, kind of how much you've learned. It could take years before all of that kind of like resurfaces. But it's such a valuable kind of aspect, kind of working in a community of people where you can really kind of like dig in and invest time that you might not otherwise have, with kind of the other ins and outs of your life and doing laundry and cooking meals or taking care of kids and all that kind of stuff. So this is a view of the interior of an old studio barn that no longer exists. It's been torn down and rebuilt as a very fancy, clean new studio. But these are some of the kilns that were constructed during the time that I was there that I had the opportunity to fire. In terms of my work, some of the things that I've been pursuing, one of the kind of consistent themes through my works, even since my undergrad time, was soda and salt firing. But that also combined with wood firing, and that's kind of partly how my path is intersected with all these folks. So while I was at Watershed, I crossed paths with both Dan and Adam at varying times, and it's these kinds of little kind of pickups that happen, and the relationships that get formed that begin to kind of translate themselves kind of quietly in the background of all the work that gets made. It's like you'd never look at a pot and say, oh, he knows Adam, but like the relationships that have formed that have helped kind of create channels and paths that get me to places are kind of all evident in the work, even though it's not really something that's tangible or visible. I'm trying to think. So I worked at Watershed as an administrator. After having that great kind of residency opportunity, I went there to be employed and left there in 2012 after having been the executive director for 5 years. And in that time, like, there was all kinds of growth, kind of professionally, but like not in my studio. Kind of building a whole new set of skills as an administrator in the planning, organization, communication, letter writing, exhibition planning, like you name it. it was kind of all there, and it was like taking a drink from the fire, like from a fire hose to start, and then, you know, eventually you kind of like figure out, you know, and this goes back to a comment that Bruce made, like to never really say no to an opportunity. And I guess I've been very, very fortunate to have lots of opportunities come my way, and I just haven't said no. Kind of walked headlong into them, probably knowing it was going to bring the death of me for a period of time, and then eventually that would recoup. You know, when I left the center and left that position, you know, my intention was to return to my studio full time. And that in and of itself was kind of a gamble, taking a step away from a job that had a steady paycheck and, you know, benefits and things like that, to return to a practice that was solely mine, independent, and I had to manage everything. And that was a terrifying step off. But, you know, I like to think that I've managed to persevere. You know, I have a very supportive spouse, and my wife, Kat, is, she's kind of allowing me to be here in a certain way, you know, to step away from the house, because she understands what this kind of opportunity means for me and is very supportive of that. But, you know, I discovered pretty quickly that just making pots and trying to sell through wholesale, consignment, online, that kind of stuff is really hard. And during my time in undergrad at Alfred, I did have the opportunity to pick up some skills dealing with kiln building. So constructing kilns for private and institutional clients is something that's kind of in my kit. And kind of, you know, within the last 5 years, that's taken kind of an increasingly larger amount of time in my schedule, which is kind of a double-edged sword. It's nice to go out and kind of work with people, know that I'm building them a tool that is going to propel their capacity as a maker in kind of directions that they won't even know for years, as they kind of work, learn, and change. Their work evolves to kind of fit the fact that they have their own kiln, and they don't have to worry about making little teeny pieces that fit in a particular kind of electric kiln or in some other community environment. The kiln building has been a big part of it, and I've also kind of actively sought out you know, commissions and consignments and things like that. So these are some images of a project from, I guess this is probably 2017. There was a restaurant called Grain Maker in Boston that approached me to make dishes for their restaurant, and it's more kind of like a Chipotle idea, where you're kind of this I don't know, what do they call it, fast casual or something like that, where, you know, rather than eating in a paper box as a take-in item, you know, these were dishes that I created that were used within the restaurant, and then they could still do takeout and things like that. But it was a whole other experience in terms of learning from the chef, talking with, you know, the staff, and like having to test things and make sure that they could survive going in and out of the oven, and, you know, high temperature, you know, sterilizing dishwashers and things like that. So there's like these little things, like you kind of get into a project and you're like, oh, that sounds cool. And 3 months later, you know, you're up to your eyeballs in researching kind of like chemistry and trying to make sure your clay body will survive all the, you know, the trials of a particular process. And it's like, whoa, okay, like that was maybe, you know, a little more than I expected. So, you know, this is another one of these things where I'm active in my community in Maine as a board member and kind of a maker kind of in the state. So we have the Maine Crafts Association. It's kind of like the statewide crafts organization that kind of serves the members of the craft community in the state of Maine. And during the 6 years that I was on the board there, we went through a major campaign to create this kind of sales marketplace that kind of both serves to support the artists in the state through sales of their work, you know, where there's a consignment and wholesale kind of arrangement. But I'm trying to think, the organization makes something like, they sell like $1.2 million worth of work a year gross, which means that at least $650,000 of that goes back directly to the makers in the community that they're supporting and that they're representing, which is a really significant number when you really think about it, and particularly for the population of our state. So it felt really good to be a part of that community and be kind of a driving force behind that. But that also created a whole new set of kind of learning opportunities and experiences, but as well as networks that have continued to kind of grow, just through kind of active fostering and making those connections and kind of keeping touch with people and staying active. Like another hat still that I wear is I was approached by a family funeral home in our area looking for someone to make biodegradable urns. And at first I didn't know what the hell that meant. I was like, biodegradable, clay isn't biodegradable. It just kind of just goes back to being what it is. But I guess that is what biodegradable is. And so I finally figured out, like, oh, they just want me to make urns and not fire them. I was like, I can do that. That's really easy. But then I had to figure out how to ship and transport greenware. So I had to get into these whole like vacuum packed single foam things with no peanuts, because these are things that you would take out to a site, like the whole packing material thing. And you can't have that like out in the field or out on a boat and have peanuts blowing all over the place, because that kind of undoes the whole like low footprint idea of biodegradable urns. So that, again, like whole other set of like both kind of, well, just the fact that the funeral industry is an industry, like Uncle Ed getting buried with his Harley, in a huge casket or something, like it's a thing. It's really weird. But these are the things that I learned as part of my process of like making these simple little urns along the way. So it's just a point, I guess, to say that I wear many hats as a kind of a professional in the field. And no one of them is kind of like right or wrong or kind of better than the other. My passion lies in making functional wear because I like to share that work with other individuals, and I like to talk about the process that goes into making these pieces and the dynamism that kind of brings them to life in the in the performance of their duty. So these last few images are just a few additional items along the way. And as Adam had kind of prefaced as part of our talk, the idea of being able to kind of sit and have further conversation with you, this is, I think for all of us, is a relatively kind of condensed, abbreviated version of our lives, and look forward to having time to talk with more of you as we go. So great, thanks.
Thank you very much.
All right, our next speaker is Mary Maglieri.
Hi, everybody. I would just like to first say thank you to Longwood University and to you, Adam. You have immensely impacted my career, so thank you very much for that. And the word orbit, you've mentioned it, Archer and both Tyler, you've even mentioned it. The word orbit has come into play a lot so far within this talk. So Dan, make sure you use it as well. It's interesting. I never thought that I would be within the same orbit of U5, let alone continuing to stay or at least visit and be here in a significant way in Farmville's orbit. It's just very interesting, and I'm very grateful to be here, so thank you. I'm from a small town in Virginia called Williamsburg. It's kind of like modern wannabe suburban town. It's kind of coastal. It's right off the James River. I grew up in between two pretty historic areas, Jamestown Settlement and Colonial Williamsburg. And within the school system that I went to, they spoke a lot about said history in that area. I don't know, some of you may be able to identify this. This is at the top of High Bridge. In 2017, I came here to Longwood. I initially started as a painting and drawing major, and I was required to take other mediums and other classes, to which I took a ceramics class, and here I am. After that, Adam has suggested that I apply for an assistantship at Peters Valley School of Craft in Layton, New Jersey. And there is where I met Bruce, and I was lucky enough to work with him and as his assistant. And my cohort, Bella, who's in the picture on the right, she was the other assistant with me, and we had an amazing summer just meeting other students and other makers, other professionals, other artists. it's something that I really, really never thought that I thought I would be making in a little space by myself and hopefully have an online, presence. But Peters Valley was an amazing, amazing situation. Oh, that is out of order, sorry. But when I was still at Longwood, my senior project was, I kind of stepped away from wheel throwing and I started to cast my hands, but I wanted to have it, at least try to have some sort of function in case the viewer was interested in such. And so I went along and casted a bunch of my hands and made them different heights with different carvings and hasps in them. I don't think that will pop up, but it juxtaposed a small video that I made, and I had like an altar table, and this video was displayed over top of it. And I was touching on the fact of, or the idea of meditation, and this idea of these ethereal ideas and these esoteric, concepts and theories that we have of like enlightenment and meditation and what that means, and how people source that through substances and psychedelics, and that's awesome and stuff. But really, kind of what you need is yourself, and just to seek that first before seeking third party and external forms. Oh, it did play.
Is not necessarily a cave that the demand is, but it's in relation to the technology that's existing. It's in relation to where we're at. I think that's all part of one package now.
Okay, so back on track now. Sorry about that. So after that is when I went to Peters Valley. And I mean, there were things that I had never even thought of. I mean, I never even conceptualized the idea of patching up a kiln or patching up a place in the kiln that could be detrimental to the firing later on. And the woman who is painting the door, she has been doing that for 25 years. That's Kulvinder, Bruce's wife. She had been doing that, 22 years. And each year it's a different image, it's a different idea, a different concept that correlates to the artist who is there firing. And so that was Bruce's firing with the stub Farlow on it. So again, I mean, Bella was my amazing cohort. I met amazing makers as well in different mediums. Peters Valley is a craft school, so there's lots of different mediums there, blacksmithing, woodworking, fine metals. So I had an amazing summer, and I learned a lot about myself and a lot about people in general, and creating relationships and what it means to have a sustainable relationship with somebody in a professional sense, but I mean even just on like a genuine sit down and have a beer, have a conversation relationship. And I was lucky enough to be brought out, as I'm sure Adam has done with many of you, out to Randy and Cricket's kiln, which is an amazing space, and they're immensely generous people. It's wild to just see how generous they are. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I didn't absorb it and take it in for all that it is. But luckily at Peters Valley, I had the opportunity to fire more wood kilns, and that is where I really started to appreciate it for all that it is, the hard work, the mistakes, the amazing results that you get out of it. Maybe you have to tweak some things or rebuild certain areas of your kiln. I mean, that's fascinating to me, and it's hard and it's a challenge, but I don't know, I like a challenge. I welcome challenges. So yeah, okay. So this is actually last year at Randy and Cricket's kiln. This was, I believe, probably wee hours of the morning. This was towards the last day, I believe. It's a beautiful space, and they're doing amazing things by bringing in community members and students from Longwood and also all over. There's a high school student out there earlier, so it's not just even like a Longwood community. It's it's the community of Farmville and the surrounding areas, and I think that's a beautiful thing. I think wood firing has that impact on people and on a community, but I think also specifically, at least within my experiences so far, that the ceramic community, the ceramic field, it's heavy on that. It really tries to encourage working with others and talking with others, and it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to say, I've been trying to make this or work on this and I can't. Do you have a suggestion? So this was a piece that came out of that kiln, of Randy and Cricket, excuse me. This was last year. So after the fall of last year, I received an incredible opportunity to do a residency back at Peters Valley. It was fully funded from a grant slash scholarship type, or it was really just a grant really, from a wonderful, wonderful woman. Her name is Francine Epstein, and she's been going to Peters Valley taking workshops and has known Bruce for a while, and she's just a phenomenal woman and really just wanted to support the arts and young artists in any way that she could. And I met her, and she contacted me and asked if this was something I would be comfortable with. And it was hard, and, you know, always look back and I'm always critiquing maybe, you know, could have changed some things about it, but I had a wonderful time and I learned a lot. I made a lot of work, you know, always could make more, but I made a lot of work, and it was an incredible opportunity to continue my education, but also continuing to be around Bruce and Colvinder and Peters Valley, and seeing the changes in a craft center. I think that's interesting to see as well. Some more photos. During my residency, I really wanted to fire the Noborigama as well as this small phoenix kiln that they have on the grounds of Peters Valley. And I was given a suggestion to maybe focus in and hone in on what I was searching for in a result, and then make work for that, because as you can tell, this is an Noborigama. That's a lot of work to fill. It was only a 1-month residency, and so that's a lot. But luckily there was a school from New York who comes down, I think yearly, to fire it, and they were nice enough to at least just let me hang out and see what they were doing, fire a little bit when I had, you know, time within the schedule, and it was awesome. It was incredible. That was my first time firing in a Noborigama. Each kiln is different. It's almost like a human. It needs something different. It responds differently to each alteration you make, and I think that's just, it's fascinating. And depending on the build of it and the material, I mean, there's so many factors that play into it, and learning more is something that, well, I know that it is something that I'm actively seeking and actively searching for. So that was some work that came out of this kiln, and
That's the Phoenix kiln?
So after that, I moved back to Williamsburg for a little bit just to tie some things up. And I got a job for a small production potter in Colonial Williamsburg area, and I was her studio tech, and she wanted to start introducing workshops within her studio space, and I was lucky enough, she asked if I would like to teach a workshop, and it was a small workshop, but it was incredible. The goal was to gain height and a little bit more body and form within the shape that they were making, and I think they did wonderful. They thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was a good opportunity. I never thought I would enjoy teaching as much as I did, but it was great. I guess as educators yourselves, watching a student I don't know, light up or get interested in something or feel accomplished when they set a goal and meet said goal. I don't know, it's an amazing feeling, and it's altruistic, but yeah. So after that, I applied for a assistantship at Sugar Maple's Center for Creative Arts, which is in the Catskill Mountains of New York. Oh my God, it was just such a great summer. I had a great cohort. His name's Johnny Arvizu. He's actually out in Japan now. And I met a wonderful artist, Katie Fee, who recently graduated, I believe, from Alfred. And she taught a workshop there, and it was just amazing to see the work she makes and how she educates and teaches in her own workshop, how she fires even. and just her perspective on life. It's interesting to chat with others and see how they view the world and view art. And yeah, while I was there, again, it's surreal to think how many people I'm meeting and how many people I've shake hands with, and I introduce myself and even still possibly keep in contact with. I met Susan Beecher, who is this lovely lady. It's not the best picture of her, but and she welcomed me out to come and fire with her and her crew, and it was amazing. Everybody fires differently. Everybody's got different ways of rolling the dice, and it was just incredible to meet those makers and see to view Susan's perspective on things. I met just incredible people, and I have some of the best mentors, I think, and I'm just very, very grateful. Some more work. This is Randy and Cricket. Cricket's the one by the fire, and then it's Randy and Steve Addis and I. Steve Addis is a amazing scholar. He's a historian of Japanese ceramics and Japanese scrolls and writing. And unfortunately he did pass, but he was a stellar man and really interesting to just chat with and hear his stories and hear his perspective on art, and even learn about scrolls I knew nothing prior to. I'm just very grateful, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you all. As young as I am and fresh as I am, I appreciate it, and it's good practice, so thank you very much for having me.
Like you take a bone dry pot and put it in water and it'll break down in 10 minutes or less. So this is just, it is a little bit more civilized way to kind of dispatch with grenades and things like that. Yeah.
No, I think that's so interesting because, like, obviously, like, I've grown up with murals. Like, my grandparents owned American cemetery supplies. So, like, I've grown up with that kind of aspect of my life. It's not, I mean, it kind of is weird in a way to talk to certain people. So I was like, oh, that's so cool. I'm going to have to tell them about it.
How did you all support yourselves during those early, like, formative years, whether it be, like, post-grad and between, like, colleges and whatnot, those kind of, like, liminal spaces when you're not really, like, in a studio, but you're still an artist because you're still making, you're still thinking about, or, like, work. And in that same question, is there something that you wish you would have known during those, like, liminal spots?
Who wants to take that?
I sold fortune cookies on the street. I was also really skinny in those days. I don't know, live to learn to live on very, very little. My job, if you want numbers, I'll tell you, I made $12,000 a year when I worked for the production pottery, which is, way below the poverty line, or at least below it. I don't know. Just, I think a lot of it is the tenacity to just keep going. And, you've heard the theme of, like, never say no. So, like, selling a pot here or there, just doing what you can, but believing. I think often the money thing gets separated from, like, trust yourself, believe in yourself. Look in the mirror once in a while and just, you figure it out.
I would say that just keep in mind that when one door closes, another's going to open. It always has for me. And going back to that, don't say no. The other thing too is, like, skill bases are really interesting and important to have. Having a variety of skills for an artist. Make sure that you're following your passion, because your passion is always going to be convincing. Passion always convinces people that what you're doing is something important, and what you're doing is that you're really serious about it. So no matter what. And as far as economy goes, gosh, it's been you know, most of my adult life I've made a living just as an artist, and so it's always way up and down. You know, during the pandemic, you know, maybe I made $9,000 in 1 year. Other times, when I was a production potter, 1 year I made $41,000. It's always been really radically up and down. And Govinda is also an artist, so same thing goes for her. And thankfully, she's interested in the same life, you know, that lifestyle thing. Thankfully, she's interested in that. So it's the two of us together, you know. And 1 year she'll sell a bunch of paintings, and we'll have a good year, and I won't. And 1 year I'll do that, and she won't, you know. So it's always such a mix, but it's just hanging in there and learning to stay within your means, you know. Yeah.
Also, leaving the field, you're gaining life experience somewhere else, and that you're going to bring that back into your art when you come back. So it's like when Tyler and I were talking about those 10,000 hours that don't all have to be in the same place. I think that's really important. I think it's the mark of an artist to be that creative with all of those aspects, financial, experiential, and the art side.
Yeah, just because you want a life in art doesn't mean it has to be all art all the time.
Consecutive, yeah.
I mean, one of the themes here is it is lifestyle, and it comes in different forms. You know, I remember you got to go make some money, so you went and built barns because he's got that skill set and the work ethic, and there was a goal, and then had the space to make some of the most kick-ass work that you didn't get to see.
But I was taking these these buttress systems and these roof systems that I was working on. They were going right into the work on the side, so that's what I love about that.
I had a question for Chris about grad school. You said you went when you were like 35, 36?
30, yeah.
Did you go because you felt like you knew, or what was like the motivation, and did you wish you went earlier?
It's a great question. Everybody's path is different. I think that's one of the themes here. At 36, I was married with no children, but that was a topic of conversation, you might say. I was also, one thing I haven't really highlighted, I also love teaching. One of the media that I work in most and is most dear to my heart is classrooms. I love it. So there was a reality that getting a degree meant that there's a reality in a sustainable career in teaching and higher education, and even in primary education now, of getting a degree. At the time, that converged with me realizing that I was wondering too what sculpture meant, and I had no training, like zero training. I had been a potter only. And so I did not go to a clay school. I went to the Maine College of Art, and it was a transdisciplinary program that was, first day, as we introduced ourselves, we were told, how dare you introduce yourself by way of what you do. I didn't ask what you do, ask who you are. And it was, it was kind of right for my path. But I felt like if I didn't do it, I wasn't going to do it. And it was not easy, and I have finally paid it off. But it has taken a really long time, and I'm very proud of it. And I feel like it was I think it's got to be. I don't know. I'd love to hear what other people think. I think grad school is not a given. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, I think it's got to be the right fit. And there are so many different programs. I think it's almost like a tuning fork. If you're thinking about it, get near it and see if it resonates.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have like a body of work that you like really wanted to do, and was that like motivating you to go to grad school?
No, that wasn't the motivation. I had a body of work. I was teaching at the time, and I was really using all the school's resources to I was making things, and it revealed to me like, dude, you don't know what sculpture is, but you're trying to do sculpture.
Me.
And I was just like, well, you need help on that. And so it was just one of those, like, how do you say that to your partner? knowing the debt that it's going to put you in. And so I just had to make it right. And I think, that's a conversation we've had, and,
Yeah.
and everybody's gone at different times.
Or more than once.
I was a little bit older when I went to grad school. I think I was 30, 31. But the best piece of advice I got was from Susan Peterson, who I had in my slides. I came to her one day in New York, and I said, I think I'd like to go to grad school. What's your advice on where should I go? And she said, well, I think you should pick the school based on who you want to study with, not the school. And find out an artist who you really feel a connection to and see if they teach. And then if they teach, go to that school and study with them, because you know at least one thing going in, and that is that you think about the universe in some kind of similar way. You have some kind of shared interest or passion or whatever.
So who was that teacher for you?
So it was Tony Hepburn. So I really was fired up about this guy, Tony Hepburn, and I told her, and she said, well, he goes to a place called Alfred. I didn't know Alfred, I'd come out of a writing program, and it just happens to be here in New York State. So I went and met Tony Hepburn. Yeah. And he said, you came through, I'm talking to him in his office, and he says, you came through writing, what makes you think? Why in the world do you think that we want you to come to Alfred? We want you to come to school. Typical British. What you're saying. I don't remember exactly what I said. But the next thing I know, I was, yeah. But that was a great piece of advice, I think. It wasn't the school, it was the artist.
A lot of people here are in a position where they'll think about being an assistant or assisting someone, and you've all had an assistant in some capacity. What makes a good assistant?
Well, for the application process, for me, understand the context for which you're applying in all jobs. Understand what it is. And so at Peters Valley, I might get a certain X number of applications and so forth, and I read their letters. I read every single letter. Same at Sugar Maples, of course. And I make sure that young person, usually it's a young person, understands the context of the job. So if it's a letter that says, I'm really excited to go and make my work and have a studio and that kind of thing, they don't understand the context. So then that can help me determine. If it's somebody who says, I'm interested in community, I'm interested in the exchange of ideas, that's a big part of an assistantship. I'm interested in helping instructors and so forth augment a program. And so in the application process, that is critical for me. And by and large, I've had really great assistants because they got that from the get-go. They understood that.
And now that he's given that advice, don't apply to some place and tell him what he wants to hear when you want something else, because you will wind up unhappy. And I have found that in a similar position when I was at Watershed. I would review applications, and I would basically read letters that they read great, and then the person got there, and it was not their prime motivation, and it caused a lot of conflict. They were unhappy in that condition, and the circumstances weren't a good fit, and so it was an unhappy result for everybody. So it's a matter of being honest with yourself about what you want.
Yeah.
And it's like searching out those particular opportunities, because an assistantship is a great way to get involved and engaged in the community. That could be a stepping stone into a possible residency. So Mary's a great example of that, of kind of being there for a summer. She got the lay of the land, got to know the people, forged a relationship with Bruce in return for a residency in the same place. And that's important. That residency, yielded an, well, I'm not speaking for you, but it was a different experience than when she was an assistant there. Because her time was much more her own and not necessarily dedicated to the program in that way. And that's a really important distinction to make. It's like, know what you're applying for and why, as importantly, why you're applying for it.
And it must be said, so I haven't known Mary very long. I don't know that everyone has, but the tenacity and the amazing, it's not even just a positive attitude. And it's not only that she's helpful, but just that passion has earned her a tremendous amount of respect, not only from the others of us sitting up here, but by many other people. And it gives me hope that the world is going to be okay, to be honest with you. And I hope you all are like that. But no, it's just, I think that it's really true. It can't be BS,
I have a question for Mary.
Sure.
When you were doing those hands, what was the initial casting process?
So I did like one side of my hand, and then I would flip it over and do the other. So I laid my hand down and basically outlined my entire hand. I would get the position I wanted. Adam helped me because it was really difficult to do it with one hand, and then pour a 5-gallon bucket of plaster on your arm. But I just basically outlined the perimeter of my hand in clay, and then boarded it up, coddled it up with boards. Obviously made sure there was no seams, no cracks. You can use clay for that. Mix your plaster up really well. Dumped it in 45 minutes an hour, let it set up.
So you waited with your hand?
Yeah. I would suggest soaping your arm really good. If you're casting any body parts, particularly with hair on them, soap it up. For sure. And then, take off the coddling boards and everything like that, pull your hand out, flip it over, and repeat the process.
So for the finished pieces that were like this, you casted it and then altered the cast clay instead of the mold.
I did. My hand was positioned somewhat in the way that I wanted it, but after, when it was still soft, like when the clay was soft, the casting slip was soft, I did maneuver it a little bit. But yeah, I tried to get the form in the way that I wanted my hand to be prior to casting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question for Bruce in particular. One thing that kind of like sucks me into your work in particular is that kind of boundary between functional and non-functional that I see. Like I noticed these like raw edges, and it's almost collaging in those clay pieces themselves. And I was just wondering, how do you balance that line for yourself? And how do you, like when you look at a piece, do you know, should I keep adding more or is it just finished?
Yeah, God, what a great question. Would you write that up for me? Let's see. Well, I'm starting with the architecture, right? And with architecture, on the current work, these floors meet the wall, and it's real clean. And I asked my dad one time when I was in architecture at Alfred, I said, "What can you define in one sentence architecture for me?" And he said, "Yeah, it's two-dimensional rendering of three-dimensional relationships." That's perfect. And I'm thinking conceptually, I'm thinking emotionally, right, for the work. And that was figurative sculpture. So it's revelatory for me when he did that. And from that point on, I have struggled. I've tried to find a way to move that basic concept into functional wear, into the utilitarian. And it has been very difficult because, as you point out, Haley, rough edges, incongruity, I think maybe, or something, So those are, I did mention contradictions and being drawn to contradictions. So I like the idea of rough edge and, say, smooth interior where you're going to wash the dish, but rough edge on the outside. So you've got this push and pull. So I'm very aware of that. I'm aware of damage. And so when I damage a piece when I'm making it, instead of instead of, say, getting rid of it or whatever, I patch. But I make the patch have an architectural kind of vibe to it, for lack of a better word. So it's always kind of push and pull when I'm doing it, and each piece, not all pieces, but within that body of work that you're referring to, each piece becomes a project in and of itself, and I'm giving each piece its own kind of voice. I'm working to give it its own voice, and I don't know if that's answering your question at all, but it's definitely become a very prominent aesthetic in my work that I'm trying to work with, and I'm really interested in, say, those clean lines, those architectural lines that I draw into the work, which I started back in grad school with the figures, because I was using the lines like my father would use the lines to come through body parts, say from crotch up through the heart over to her eyes, you know, and so making that connection between within sexual, kind of a sexual energy there, representation. And so with the pots, with the utilitarian work, I'm trying to do the same thing in a way, draw attention away from or to something.
Yeah, because I know when I first saw your work, I was almost kind of like taken aback by that sense of like, I see this piece, and to me in my brain when I first look at it from the eyes of someone who was then in college, I'm thinking, wow, this is like a beautiful piece, like I'm imagining it like in a museum, wall kind of thing. And then I remember you had said, I think one of the larger bowls that went into the work kiln that we just put in there, I think you had said it was like a salad bowl or something, or it was just a large bowl, and I looked at it, and it took me a second to like imagine it as a bowl that could contain food rather than an object that is to be viewed at in the art sense. And it was such a, again, contradiction in my own brain that I had to do with myself, even as a functional potter in a sense.
Yeah.
It was just such an interesting way to look at your work.
Yeah, what can you put in it, you know? Like those architectural bowls, I think of them as bowls actually, or they're kind of like stadiums. The basketball court that you saw is a suspended floor, so it actually doesn't meet the walls of that big stadium. It comes over and there's a little gap. And so that floor, and it wasn't Dad's technology, I can't remember what architect came up with that, but it was back in the 60s, was to create what's called a floating floor. And so that those floors move, and they're thought initially to actually protect the athlete. So a hitter in volleyball, a striker, jumping way up there and constantly landing and stuff, that floor just got the slight microscopic ability to move. And so with that recent body of work, I've been playing with that idea of suspended floor. Why does the floor of a pot have to meet the wall? So it's really simple. I mean, it's kind of a funny little concept, but it drives the aesthetic of the piece big time, I think. You know, it makes it interesting for me. How can I suspend that floor? It doesn't make it any less functional, you know, like for a fruit bowl. You know, you just couldn't serve soup in it.
I have a question for Chris. So since you're an art educator, is there any advice that you would give yourself before, like, that you didn't know before going into education?
Get in front of a classroom as soon as you can. I found out I do not like teaching high school. It just wasn't a good fit, and again, I think it's about fit. I mean, I think a lot of people think it's it pays the bills or it's a means to an end, but that won't last long. But I think the other thing too is to maybe ask yourself what do you like about teaching? You know, I mean, we can talk about this. Are you coming to the kiln?
Yeah.
All right, we can talk about this, but there's just such a conventional hierarchy of power, you know, in the conventional relationship of teacher and student, teacher and classroom, and I just, you know, for me, I think of it as like a medium where it's not manipulating the medium, right? As an artist, or in that case, a teacher, but it's like, what's my role? What is this dynamic? And what's the best, what dynamic would be best for all? right? And again, to me, a classroom is a lot like a wood kiln. I hate to say it, but I don't hate to say it. But I think getting in front of, I think sometimes we think of things being interesting or resonant, and that to me, because I also teach teachers, like I teach in our grad program for K through 12 educators, and I'll tell you, the student teaching, it's late in the game to find out.
You don't like it.
Yeah, it's a tough one, you know. So, I mean, in this day and age, there are so many like little community, like Mary, you were talking about like getting in front of the classroom and really loving it, but it sounded like you hadn't done that before, right? Something simple, or not simple, but something accessible before there's a huge buildup in investment would be that, but gotta love it, because it will upset you a lot, right, Adam?
I was wondering if you guys could speak to your interest in wood firing in particular. Like in ceramics, I feel like there's a lot of different ways people finish their work. There's a lot of different temperatures that you can fire to, and especially once you start getting into like more sculptural work rather than functional, I think that broadens it even more. So I just wondered if you guys could speak to why wood firing.
Well, I would say the craziest bastard on this stage as far as wood firing goes and trying to fit a certain kind of aesthetic into it is that gentleman. So let's start with that guy right there. Because he went through his work really quick.
Pretty quick.
And what you would have seen there is some pretty amazing technical prowess there in terms of wood firing.
But really simple, the way that atmosphere lays on that geometry. And where those two, the macro and the micro, just meet. I love it. Because I'm in a gas kiln or electric, I just use breaking glazes usually to highlight the edges, but that atmosphere just dances with the forms. And I mean, the community, the networking, the relationship building, yeah.
I also love the lack of total control. I think as an artist, I personally have to structure that into my practice. I also, with some of the affinity that I've always had in the study that I've done on sort of ceramic histories, where it's beyond an aesthetic. It sort of ties into the cultural norms and practices and philosophies, has always been interesting, but a dangerous place to go, in terms of like, trying to co-opt that or something. But for me, I do love the aesthetic, but I really love, I like the idea that it's a dance.
The one sentence that Chris said there that was really interesting is he said, the lack of total control. So lack of total control as opposed to the total lack of control. So that was key. That was key to understanding that a little bit. And I like that, what you say, yeah, lack of total control, because the wood firing does definitely have that element, no matter how long a person has been firing and only firing their own kiln. They still have a lack of total control, So there is that element, that challenge. For me, for my ideas, because I work with lots of different clays, depending on what I want to talk about. So the devils are red. Our tradition thinks of devils as red, right? Mm-hmm. Angels are white. Angels, right? So I'm going to use porcelain. So I select my clay bodies and my firing processes based on what I'm wanting to talk about with the work, whether it's the pots or the sculpture. So with the work, I'm trying to access my dad's architecture, that concrete thing, and the Wyoming landscape. It's out memory for me. When I make the pots, I'm tapping into the landscape of Wyoming. And wood firing does that for me, for that specific body of work.
To be honest, I was drawn to wood firing for the aesthetic and the atmosphere.
once I started to learn more about it, I personally attribute it almost to like a concert. There's all these different factors that play into it. I mean, you have the crowd, you have the band, you have the lights, you have the sound system. You have to have good acoustics in the building, right? Like you can't have bad acoustics for a concert. If there's a bar, awesome. Bars all in the concert venue always make it more fun. There's all of these elements, all of these things that contribute to a final result or a final goal. And I find that fascinating. It's also one of the hardest things I've ever done. It's such a challenge on a physical basis. It's really difficult, but on a mental basis, there's so many things to take into consideration. I mean, clay body, glaze, no glaze, flashing slip, wood, how large the wood is, how large your strokes are, how frequent your strokes are. It's one of the most challenging things I've ever done, and I don't know, I love it. I like that. I like that challenge. I like leaving from a shift and either knowing I, maybe messed up and could have done X, Y, or Z, or feeling like, whoa, it wanted to rock it. I held it back a little bit and at least did what I was supposed to do while on shift. I don't know. It's a challenge that I've never felt such an adrenaline, and a challenge I've never felt is so my own before.
Not to belabor points too much, but the idea of control or the lack thereof is a really kind of interesting and kind of sadistically alluring aspect of wood firing. Because, like, when we show objects as images, countless crappy pots just laid to waste, stuck to posts, all that kind of stuff, like, are just in the background. And yeah, I mean, I find the draw to the wood firing process is kind of like balance between kind of like control, or kind of somewhere in the boundary waters of control and abandon. But there's also this aspect that I think also kind of ties as much into my kind of interest in salt and soda firing, just general atmospheric firing, which is this kind of sense of authorship that comes with the act of engaging in the process as intimately as we do when we're stoking a kiln, when we're making those decisions about how long to fire, where we're going to place pots. Because as the experience grows, you kind of get general understandings about what the conditions might be at the very front of the firebox versus the very back of the kiln. And you begin to make decisions, and you may even make work specific to those particular kinds of areas. So it begins to kind of tune some ideas, and it may be just a total illusion, that what you're thinking is going to be like this thing. Because I guess there's plenty of times where that comes back to bite me. I mean, that's not anything like what I was anticipating that could look like. But again, this I think of it as like authorship, I guess. And there's like a fingerprint, like where you kind of you just never stop touching the clay until it comes out of the kiln. And even then, you might sandblast it. Like the process doesn't ever really have to end, But I guess eventually, in order to make a living, you kind of have to like step back and kind of call it done.
We were talking about the way stories end the other day, and I think it was Mary said, "What do you think of cliffhangers?" So we're all talking about that, and that idea of whether or not we're comfortable with coming to the end of the story and being told by the author or the screenwriter or whatever that's the end and we wrapped it all up. Which do you like better? The one where they wrap it all up, or the one that's left for you to, the audience, to decide for themselves or to invent and so forth? And wood firing is a little bit like that.
Even in between, because we've also, behind the scenes, for those of you that haven't seen this, we're on shift together, and there's like a thing we're trying to do. There's you got certain tools, you do them different ways. And so it's interesting to see, so I think of that as more like, I don't know if it's quite Mad Libs, but it's like before even the cliffhanger, it's like, well, we can go this way, we can go that way.
Yeah.
We know we want to go towards that way, but we can do it different paths.
One of the questions Covinda's always getting is, how do you decide when you're finished with a painting? I hear people ask her that all the time. Wood firing is like that. How the hell do you decide when to end a wood firing? you know? Some people it end at like 6 hours before, and some people would go another 6 hours longer, you know, than me, say, for example. So it's kind of an interesting process that way. It's not definitive.
I know one thing that Tyler talked about, and I kind of like latched onto it, was that word of like validation. Because I remember when I was going through my senior thesis, Adam had kind of made a joke about, well, you want validation in your series of work, and it kind of was like a jolt of like, well, yeah, I never thought about it that way. And that we as artists, we really do, when you think about it, kind of want that validation from the community, from our other classmates, like being kind of seen as an artist to the people around us. But how do you each give yourself your own time for your own personal validation to your own work? Like when you're in the studio by yourself and maybe something's not going to go in the same way that you want it to, but you know that you're capable of doing those things. Like how do you give yourself your own like validation, your own little urge or push kind of thing?
My God, you guys ask good questions. These are great questions. Nice job.
Nicely done, Adam. That's called dodging.
I guess I'm wondering, are you talking about the validation is the push, or what do you do to push through?
Yeah, like kind of what do you do to push through?
Yeah. My studio is set up into areas. I have a library. It's not much of a library. I have things to look at, and sometimes going and looking at pictures is great. Reading is great, right? I also have a table, and this is ridiculous that I had to do this, but I have a table. It's called the fuck up table, and it is a small table. It's the old wedding table that you built for me years ago, and I go and I do dumb things. I add gelatin to slip. I add yeast and beer to slip. I do things that I don't think will do anything, but I had to make a space to give myself permission to play and to realize that I wouldn't, if I didn't have a space for that, I wouldn't do that. And then I'll get stuck through those moments. So I go to that place or find something else to do, but I'm trying not to avoid the studio. That's, I think, the key. I don't know if that's quite answer your question. I guess I don't see it as validation.
I don't know if it's right or wrong that I do this, but I don't, and I know I'm young, I'm very young, but I struggle a lot with, is it done? Is it good? Do I like it? Going back to a lifestyle aspect of it, I try to not compare myself and my work to other people, but I compare my lifestyle. So how my lifestyle is and what my lifestyle has become and the type of person I've developed into. Because I am not the person I was when I was 18. I'm not even the person I was when I was a senior here. And I'm really grateful for that. So I guess I validate myself through who I am as a person. And I hope that floods into my work.
So I have this process where I set up a situation and I respond to it, right? And these ideas come, I get into a certain headspace in the studio, and I have just respect for those ideas that come to me during that time. Sometimes the unexpected too. I just feel like the keys to the next piece are in me finishing this piece, seeing it through, and respecting, that headspace. So for me to move on, I always feel like I have to bring this in a complete state. So that helps me complete things.
Right. That's interesting. Whereas I'll work on numbers of pieces. But I'm kind of doing the same thing. I'm asking questions, always asking questions about each piece. So I start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm asking for I build that quite a bit, and then I'm asking questions and answering them in the next one. But in terms of validation, I don't feel like I've never felt like I had to be validated. It's driven my mother crazy. I just, you know what, every single one of us in here, We're less than 1% of the population as artists. In the United States, artists make up less than 1% of 360 million people. That's not a lot of validation to begin with, right? I mean, Norway, God, they've got like, I don't know, like 9% or something crazy that consider themselves artists and so forth, but I'm sure it's not that high. But it's, that validation's definitely got to come from within you. Hey, you have it, I can tell. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I guess I don't remember saying the word validation, but all the same, yeah.
Didn't you say validate, the word validation?
Yeah. Yeah. But it's interesting. So, I mean, Bruce and I think, I kind of follow a similar kind of path in terms of just approaching work in the studio. And I kind of married that a little bit with kind of just like the madness of kind of Chris's like fuck-up table where, like I try not to let a fireman go by where I don't have some kind of a test in there. You know, whether it's just kind of like trying to make improvements to a particular glaze or really pursuing some, you know, concoction that I have no idea really what the results may be, or some blend of concoctions and things like that. And I guess there is a kind of a moment of self-validation that occurs when, you know, I've kind of conceived of a problem, executed a solution, and it reveals something to me positive. There's plenty of those opportunities where it's like, you know, the shard pile just fills with more glaze tests and all that kind of stuff that, for my purposes. And this is, again, it's like, it's one of these, it's a very kind of challenging question because, like, I'm seeking something specific in my work, and where I might not see a validation, somebody else may, because it's like it's such a subjective process. You know, as I look through a table full of glaze tests, you know, I may just kind of just visually sort out stuff that just isn't interesting to me. But other people, you know, will go through and they're like, oh, well, what are all these things? And, you know, and it's those moments where I kind of interact with other people and I see their kind of interest in something else and I'm like, well, what the hell am I not seeing in that? You know, and it's like I kind of have to ask myself that question. And that's where I start to feel a little lack of validation self-wise because I'm just like, well, the fuck do I know? Like, do I even know what I'm doing? Because, like, other people see interest in things that I don't. You know, and like, why is that? You know, so I have to kind of always kind of recycle some of that information and try and kind of, you know, turn it into the soil and see what comes out next.
It's a great question. So if you guys were okay, so you have actors, musicians, and visual artists. Talking about validation, which one would you say, which group needs the most validation and which one needs the least?
And on that, oh, come here, ask one more question. Do one more question. Sorry.
I have a question for Chris. You're just leading with controlled improvisation and following your curiosity. That's something that really resonates with my work, especially lately. How do you kind of navigate and sort through those thoughts to almost keep yourself on some sense of a path and just kind of to almost when to stop playing in a sense?
That's a great question. I think what's intriguing is the idea of structure that's fluid. Like, we don't normally think of fluid and structure in the same, right? The answer to that is I surround myself with interesting things that emulate that need for structure. So, do you know the restaurant El Bulli? And I'm going to get it from you guys later, but it was a restaurant in Spain. Look it up. El Bulli, B-U-L-L-I. And if everybody can, there's a YouTube, there's a DVD, but Anthony Bourdain, before he passed, made a wonderful documentary of Ferran Adria and El Bulli back in 2006. It is so worth watching. That'll be part one of the answer, right? The other thing is I work on multiple projects. You know, I try to, I don't try, it just happens. I work on multiple things. Where Dan's talking about working through an idea.
There's series going on.
Yeah, because I need to like go over there
So
for a
there's
while.
different series going on, but
Yeah.
you're completing certain things in those series at different times.
Yeah. But having so what kills me is when people are like, this is what I do. I'm like, really? That's what? That's, there's more, right? And I cook a lot. I don't know. I just kind of, one of the themes that came through a few people was that dissolution between, or the decompartmentalization between art and then who you are in other settings. And so like making sure that I'm active and proactive in different series of work, different activities in the studio, different, being proactive in different parts of life. It seems to, without forcing it, and that's the concern, right? You don't want to be contrived. I don't know if it's working. I'm going to tell myself it is. I'm going to validate myself.
And we go to places that our field isn't always comfortable with. It's not fashionable. So it's interesting if you're juried into a show and the juror's a painter or from some other field, and they'll finally see what you think you might be seeing in your work. That's some nice.
Bruce in 2015 put a big Pinocchio piece in a gallery in Providence, Rhode Island, and it was the talk at the bar like, did you see that Bruce piece? That wasn't critical, but it was. Do you know that?
It was ridiculous. It was a ridiculous piece.
It was great,
and it was a teapot show. No, it was a pouring vessel show. Right. And when I unpacked it with the guy who was curating the thing, I could not wait for him to see it. And the first words out of his mouth were, "You didn't do that."
Yeah, are there any other questions? I want to kind of do one.
I have a question.
But we do have a shift at 6, so I kind of feel. Let's do one last question.
Okay. You guys were talking about the 1,000 hours and like jumping in different parts of life, and I'm doing ceramics right now, but I have a lot of other interests too. And particularly, you were talking about a lot of your other things. And have you found that like ceramics is fulfilling in bringing in all of your other interests into your work, or do you still like seek out other things that you're interested in outside of your practice?
I've definitely focused, but always seeking, always going outward and bringing it back.
If this doesn't work out, or at some point, I'm pretty convinced I'll be a butcher. And I'm totally fine with that.
Such a true statement.
We're not fine with that. I do a number of different mediums and so forth. So I do that because each one of those mediums for me has a different thing. It's able to be the vehicle for me to talk about different kinds of ideas. Yeah, so my poetry, I can talk about ideas that I don't think that necessarily clay is the best suited to. So I'm playing around with lots of different.
I'm definitely still on my path. I understand that. I'm actively still trying to focus in on a body of work, at least for the time being, as a 24-year-old, the work that I want to make right now. And I can't coin this term. I can't take the credit for it. The skills pay the bills, baby. So, it's always great to have other skill sets and other interests and things like that. But if this is something you're driven to and something that you really crave, I think these guys are perfect examples of it. You always find a way.
I find it very interesting that you said you're still on your path.
Yeah,
Do you think
I
we're
did
not?
too. I picked up on that.
No, of course, but like here I don't know.
Forging your way.
Yeah, I'm
Beginning of your path.
I'm waiting for the red light to change.
I'm sharpening my blade to cut through all the brush. They have their blade sharpened and are actively cutting through brush. That's what I know.
Lower mileage.
The 10,000 hours thing is very fashionable at the moment. We throw it around. Malcolm Gladwell just wrote a book with that title. And, but that idea goes back very far in different civilizations, and also 7 years, 7-year apprenticeship. 7 years that every cell in your body has replenished itself, so you actually become the thing you've been doing. Yeah, so I like thinking about that. Anyway.
I forgot the question.
I was just asking about like other interests and like if you feel like clay is always a vehicle that you can use for other things that you are passionate about.
I guess, yeah, like Bruce changes media kind of within an artistic context. Like, I guess like kiln building and other things like that become a different media for me, but they all eventually kind of feed into clay. And they ultimately kind of like, kind of spiral around so that there's some part of that activity that kind of recycles itself and reappears somewhere in the line of my work. And yeah, it's just, I mean, I guess I have other interests, like I like sailing and I like being outdoors and things like that. And those also still have their own kind of contribution, because I say I like sailing, I don't like water skiing, I don't like the noise of a motor, I like the quiet and the slowness of that motion, which is just different and it's kind of more aligned with kind of how I spend my time in my studio kind of thing. So there's like those little things that kind of become touchstones elsewhere. But in terms of like activity-wise, yeah, like I feel like even like my administrative work, working at a ceramic art center, like it all kind of cycles back into clay as the thing.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions.
Yeah. Great question. When is the unload and can we all be there?
So the unload is next Saturday, so yes, you can all be there.